very happy to announce a big part of our CornCon family as well, Miss Kate Goldman, and she's here to talk about human risk. Thank you so much. Here she is.
Thank you. All right. What's going on? First afternoon. Is everyone fed, watered, happy, ready to roll? Don't jump out of your seats. It's exciting. All right. I'm thrilled to be back here with you guys. I got to tell you, it's my favorite cyber conference to come to. So it makes my heart glad to be here and to chat. I apologize that I sound sort of like a drowned frog right now. I lost my voice earlier this week, but it seems like it's coming back, so hopefully it'll hold out. If not, we'll just start to insert some hold music. We'll see how it goes. So today I wanted to chat with you guys a little bit about digital risk culture and how we can look at human risk differently in our organizations. Because a lot of times we talk about people. Sometimes we don't talk about them in the most positive terminology or vocabulary. And I want to kind of unpick some of the challenges that we're seeing at large organizations today and help give you guys a framework so you can start to think of these things from a different perspective. Because I believe, I know that something big is shifting in terms of how all of our organizations are going to look at not just our human risk, but our digital risk overall. So I think for me, one of the gauntlet being thrown movements, or sort of the we're off to the races, was when Jen Easterly testified before Congress. And she was speaking specifically about CNI and national infrastructure, but one of the things she said was that cyber risk is business risk. Does everyone agree with that? Does anyone disagree so we can kick you out? No, we're good? All right, fair. Ha. All right, so cyber risk is business risk. And you know, I think everyone in the room kind of knew that before, or maybe we had been standing in front of a board of directors or in front of different business leaders and tried to convince them of this thing, right? That it's like, no, we are here to protect your assets. We are here to protect your assets. And we are here to help make sure that we protect the data and we secure the organization. We are here for you, but it hasn't always translated out of the tech stack. Does that make sense? Right? So she says this in front of Congress, and I think we're off to the races because there's a lot of other things happening at the same time that are starting to see this macro level strategic shift from just cyber is a tech thing to cyber risk is a business thing. Okay, so we're sort of off to the races. Now, if we think about it, business risk, cyber risk, I look at it all as digital risk. For me, this is just another sort of phase that we're going on from when we started perhaps even digital transformation. Does that make sense? Because anytime you get in there and you change the guts of an organization, the three-legged stool, people, process, or tech, whenever you disrupt normal business operations, right, you're going to introduce risk into the business life cycle. Does that make sense? Okay? So if we look at business risk and we say, well, what is the digital risk inherent? You know, I think everybody in this room is well aware that it affects us all. It affects every company. You look at the Verizon data breach report, the numbers are only getting worse. You know, even the Titans are vulnerable. SolarWinds, CrowdStrike, MGM, the list goes on and on. We don't need to name and shame because everybody here has the same exposure and is doing their best with their defenses. So I look at that and I'm like, well, how do we unpick it, or how do we start analyzing how we can actually make it better? And the second gauntlet that was thrown down, to the big red flag that was exciting for me, not for Microsoft, but for me, personally exciting, was when the Cyber Safety Review Board put out their like 20-page report on what happened and what their thinking was on the Microsoft breach. Did anyone actually read that? Did anyone hear about it? Okay, so they put out this report, and I'm like, well, I'm curious to see kind of what's in there, et cetera, and I'm reading. And on the first page, on the second page, and on the third page, they explicitly call out the security culture at Microsoft. And I was like, stop it. We're not just going to like talk about hacking group names, dark trace, cloud, super vulnerability, exploit attack, like techno jargon. I was like, wait, we're talking about that? And then they said something profound. They said, the board concludes that Microsoft's security culture was inadequate and requires a complete overhaul. And then they go into all this language about all the things the board needs to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I have never seen that before in my life. And I was also like, it is time. So it's like, you know, you were born for a moment. I was like, it is our time. This is my time. This is exactly what we need. So the first word that made me really curious was inadequate. Kind of subjective, don't you think? Wonder what that means. What is adequate security culture? Because nobody's defined that. I looked in NIST, guess what? It's not there. And I looked in ISO, and it's not there. And I looked across all the cybersecurity frameworks and standards, and it's not there. So when the regulators come and give you a kind of vague thing that they want from you, but won't actually specifically define it, anyone else smelled trouble? That's what I love when the regulators are like, I'd like to make sure it's adequate. You're like, great, what do you mean by adequate? And they're like, no. Better than what you have? What is good? So that was the first thing. And the second thing was overhaul. And I was like, oh boy, we are in for a ride. This is going to be very exciting times, okay? So first we have Jen and CISA. Then we have the Microsoft Safety Review Board and some other really big incidents. And then third is that the regulators are coming. And I think this is an ongoing trend of the last couple years, but there is a steady increase in the number, complexity, and scope of all these regulations. Agree? So when we're dealing with multinational organizations, and I'm like, great, let's talk about GRC and privacy and compliance, and how do you actually navigate through all these things? And they slap down like 3 pages of just lists of regulations that they have to comply with. And I'm like, that sounds like fun. Let's dig in, let's see how we go. But this pressure is increasing on all businesses. It has to be transparent, it has to be visible, it has to be auditable, all the things we know. Get out your CMMI and enjoy it, right? So this landscape is only increasing, making it more difficult for businesses to actually operate, but this is part of proving that you're doing the right things around digital risk. And now, just when you thought it couldn't get more exciting, the SEC jumps in and says, hey, by the way, this cyber risk thing, kind of a big deal. So I think maybe we should make the boards personally and professionally liable. Oh my God, what? So everyone's like, that's nice. Yes, cyber risk, but taking it very seriously. Send me your reports, give me your phishing scores. Talk to me about networks. I'm a board member. I might not know what a network is, but it sounds like you know what you're doing, Mr. CISO, et cetera. And then they pull all of this out. So this was announced at the beginning of the year. All public companies has to go into effect by December, which basically means anytime you have an incident, it has to get a public disclosure, okay? And it also means that in terms of risk management and governance, they want to see what you are doing. They want to know that you are following the standards. And they're inventing the standards and they're using NIST and other things that exist. So this isn't like brand new. I think it's just another step further along maturity, right? But they're going to look at your risk management processes and they're going to make sure that your board actually is trained, they know what they're doing, and that they're providing due diligence and due care around all of these risk processes, right? So that is, for some companies, a little bit more challenging. For some companies, they've never done any of this before, and it's like an oh, what kind of moment. And that's exactly where we are. So the board now has a role in cyber oversight. And I'll send these slides to anyone who wants them because I realize the font is very small. But it means that they have to outline how the board monitors, evaluates, and guides cybersecurity practices and how cybersecurity issues are integrated into overall governance processes. So that means the SEC is now interested in the decision architecture and risk psychology of your organization, whether you know that or not. How do you address risk? How do you think about it? How do you manage it? And I think that if there is this rising standard of care, and we're going to continue on this due diligence, the other thing that makes the liability question a little bit more fun is, you know, why did SOX come about? Does anyone remember? Enron, right? People go to jail. So we haven't quite seen all of that manifest yet, but that's the wins. That's the direction of travel, that you will be personally and professionally liable. And I've talked to many CISOs about this and many board members about this, that if they don't feel like you are doing enough, the right thing, following the standards, that you're going to be putting yourself into hot water. So here's my theory. All right, we got Jen, we got the Microsoft Safety Board, we've got regulations, we've got the new SEC stuff, and you could go to jail. Congratulations. Half our board members are going to retire. No, maybe, we'll see. But here's the point, is that do you think that all of a sudden there's going to be heads on a swivel like, what are you doing? And that's already happening. Show me what you're doing. Prove to me what you're doing. I think of cyber risk like an egg carton. You might think of it like the 7 layers, right, of the security stack. I think of it like an egg carton, and I know what's going to happen. They're going to go through all the eggs. They're going to be like, talk to me about your endpoints and your network security. And boop, boop. Let's talk about cloud security. Let's talk about application security. They're going to go through each of their eggs. What egg are they going to get to last? The people. Because they're going to be like, oh yeah, are you training them? Great. So here's the kicker. When they pull open that rock and they say, hey, what are we doing to make sure that the human layer at our organization is secure? Are you doing enough? Is there a standard? Are you following it? Is everyone on the same page when it comes to risk at our organization? And this is the number. Is anyone familiar with this number? Because they plaster it all over the place once a year, but it's roughly between 68 and 87% of breaches, incidents, errors, etc., have a human cause at the root, right? What shocks me is that number hasn't changed in over 10 years. They keep releasing the report and they're like, we're doing so great in phishing, we're doing so great in this, and it's like, you know, it's like putting gauze in front of a semi. It's not actually stopping the problem. At the end of the day, we still have this. We still have 87% of breaches made possible by something that is a human interacting on a process or a technology, okay? So my argument is that we have to start rethinking this as a different problem set. We need to stand back and see the forest for the trees. We actually might need to reconceptualize this entirely, because if I see another company ask their employees to be the human firewall, I will defenestrate somebody, I swear. Your employees don't want to be the firewall, are you kidding me? Hey Jane, how's your job in accounting? How about you be the firewall for this whole company? Jane's gonna be like, fuck. Right? You know, it reminds me, it's like we've crossed Lord of the Rings with The Office, right? So, you know, on one side, or Office Space, on one side you've got the orcs, obviously cyber criminals. On the other side, you've got the elves and the land of men, the good guys. And in the middle of that fight between two crazy skilled armies, you've put the guy with the red stapler. And you've told him that he's your line of defense. Are you kidding me? We can't do that anymore. So your humans are people, they're individuals. And what we've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last year is, how do you see them as the natural endpoints on your network? How do you look at people like human endpoints? And if you want to start thinking about risk and scanning for human vulnerabilities, then you have to start working with the human operating system. And that is a different set of measurements and skills, and you can make it objective and you can measure it, and I'll show you how. But they're not firewalls, so we need to throw that away, please. The second thing is they are not weak links. So if anyone in your cybersecurity, especially in October, because it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, everyone's favorite. I don't like forced fun. I like real fun. like the Bill Murray after party. Real fun, okay? So humans are not weak links. I actually will go as far to say is that humans are not inherently risky. It's all contextual, it's just like trust. We've put them into a risky situation. We've given them the most dangerous object in business today, a laptop and a phone. And then we've said, good luck. So here's a secret. I only pull it out at cocktail parties or uncomfortable introductions. I am certified to drive a forklift. Did not see that coming. Thank you. Just doing my part. So here's the thing. I remember how much certification I had to go through to drive that object. And maybe I could have hurt myself or hurt some other people or dropped a pallet of who knows what on people's heads. But at the end of the day, a computer can bring down, one developer at CrowdStrike brought down, I digress. That's the point. They're not weak links. We put people unprepared into risky situations, and we haven't properly even scoped that risk. So if we think about it differently, we have to start measuring that differently to know who to protect, where, and why, rather than just saying, let's hand everybody once a year compliance training and hope for the best. Hoping for the best got us to 87%, and it's not changing, so we got to change that. So at the end of the day, what I want you guys to think about as we reinvestigate the paradigm of humans and human risk, they are not the problem. And one other small fact, we're going to need a bigger boat. Because the thing that just chafes me is that the current cybersecurity spend is about $220 billion, according to Gartner, Forrester, Cybersecurity Ventures. Everybody's in that zone. They differ a little bit, but it's in the big billions, right? So we spend about 19 billion on endpoint security and 100 billion on perimeter and network, and about 13 billion on access and identity, and about 10 billion on vulnerability and disaster recovery, right? There's a lot in this bucket. I'm just pulling out some numbers of the different layers. And right here at the human layer, people being involved in all your tech, all your code, all of your processes, everything your company does pretty much has a human touching it at some point in its life cycle, yes. 4.5 billion last year, 2%. So 87% of breaches happen because of human error, hasn't changed in 10 years. Humans are the problem, humans need to be the firewall, humans are the weakest link. And we're spending 2% or less of our cybersecurity budgets on addressing that, or measuring it, or making it objective, or making it better. So I challenge you to organizations to go find out that number, because sometimes, we'll say like, well, we're gonna spend like, 600 with CrowdStrike this year. We're gonna put a lot of money into Palo Alto, and then, we go and say, well, how about we improve your human risk program? How about we look at your culture? How about we do all these things like, well, we don't budget, maybe 20 grand? Make it make sense. So there's my call to action. Okay, so when we think about the human factor risk, we start picking this apart, not thinking of it like training. Let's not talk about training. Let's not talk about compliance. Let's not talk about, password memorization. It's not about that. This is, a standard business architecture. Sometimes it has a triangle on the top, like a fun hat. But basically, these are the layers of any organizational architecture, right? And if the business risk is not in your servers, the call is coming from inside the house, right? It is literally in each of these things. So these are your reports and your dashboards, your systems, your risks, your controls, your users and channels, specifications, subject areas, data entities, value streams, your strategy, and the mission of the whole company has people at the heart. So if you're not paying attention to those layers, right, you got to break it down from those perspectives. And my background, I've spent time in IT, organizational change, right arm of the CIO, and then GRC, and now in cybersecurity. And I will tell you that all of this risk exists everywhere when people don't know the right thing to do, when they don't know how to do it, when you haven't made the rules explicit, when they're afraid to talk to you about the risk, when if they expose a risk, they'll get hammered, right? So how do we actually get some of those things into the organization? So the first question we wanted to answer is, what is human factored digital risk? Because it's not the same thing as someone did their training or not. So this is how we define it. It's any action or any inaction that is related to data or information or technology. It's performed by a human that directly or indirectly causes harm or has the future potential to cause harm to any aspect of a company or organization. So it's really specific and not broad at all. Okay? But when we think about these data breaches and these cyber incidents, it keeps boiling down to these things. And yet, I find it very interesting that we don't have any other way of categorizing this or measuring this. Now, if you start to research human factors, a lot of the thinking that I'm about to present over the next couple slides came out of manufacturing safety and airline safety, right? So those are two pioneer industries that looked at every single handoff from a human to a human, from a human to a process, from a human to a technology, unpicked it, and then put it back together in a way that was safe, that was about prevention, that was about protection, right? The best thing you could do is completely prevent something from happening, right? So that's like fire safety walls, or like in manufacturing plants where if smoke comes up, the foam comes down regardless. It's like nothing's getting through that. But there's lots of different things in your business architecture that you have to start thinking about. Where are we putting in those stopgap measures? Especially, let's just put it this way, in the days of AI spear phishing, which keeps me up at night, I don't know about you guys, or let's say executive deepfakes, what are the analog solutions you can put in place that are the fire stopper to a digital risk problem? And that's the kind of thinking that we have to embed in the whole organization. Otherwise, it's going to get all over the place. So let's break this down, because at a micro level, at the individual level, there's a whole taxonomy of human factors. I read a couple of books. I'm going to forget the guy's name. I'm forgetting the author because I'm tired. But it's called Normal Accidents. And he basically goes into all of these different manufacturing organizations and starts unpicking from the moment of impact, or when a safety issue occurred. So we'd say that's probably boom, right? And then he just goes backward and tries to figure out, was it a communication issue? Was it a process issue? Was it a personality clash? Was it, what are the different reasons? And so you have to start building that up into a taxonomy, the same way you would do a root cause investigation into some anomaly on the network. This is your human anomaly. Was someone not following the process? They always follow the process, right? We write it down, we put it in a paper, we stick it in a drawer, and then we say, why aren't you following the process? It doesn't make any sense. So, okay, so there's two kinds. And so the first thing that we do is we bifurcate this on direction of intention, okay? Was it a mistake because it was unintentional? Or actually, is it an intentional violation, right? Because if you're tracking these as patterns over time, where do you think you find your malicious insiders? Versus where do you think you find Sally in accounting who's clicked the link 17 times and we need to actually just train her better, okay? So this is where you can look at these things and you start breaking them down into these categories so that you can start to get some data as to where in the process it's breaking down or how you can actually do better. So these are the kind of things that we unpick with a lot of our clients where we say, what are the different outcomes that are happening from these intentional and unintentionals? Was it just someone forgot? Was it an oopsie? Was it a slip? Well, how many of them? At what level? Because the CFO having an oopsie is different than, Jim on the dock. And that's totally cool because people have different access, risk levels, targeting, identity rights. So these are all the things you have to unpick when you think about who's at my organization, and then you unpick the business architecture, and then you overlay that with things like systems access, right? And the different things that the cyber criminals would be targeting them for, right? So it's just three simple lenses into your business. But then you have to start figuring out where the lapses and the slips, because those are the gaps you need to fill. So when you start to think of what is a healthy digital risk culture versus what's not so healthy, there's a couple of things that we investigate and we measure quite a bit. So obviously, the worst being the fraud, sabotage, theft, and vandalism, malicious insiders. But then we also uncover a lot of different gaps from unintentional, right? Not knowing the process, not having onboarding training, right? When you're a new hire, lack of alignment, lack of confidence to be able to navigate perhaps new tools that you've rolled out without the appropriate training, because we never do that. Like, we develop great tools and then we never rush the user training part of it, do we? Yeah, okay. So that's my life. All right, so the reason for non-compliance, the reasons for compliance, and then at the end, we also grade this on what I call the GAS, or the employee give a shit score. Because actually what we've found through data and through some of the correlations we've made is that if you have a healthy organizational culture where people want to work there and they feel like it's a fair deal and they feel properly rewarded and motivated and all the things that you would go read about in Harvard Business Review, I'm not making it up, right? So the things that you would consider to be a healthy culture, right, you can actually figure out how much concordance your employees have with the organization itself. Because if they don't care about the organization, awareness is not careness, is what I say all the time. I can be aware that someone is robbing a bank or a jewelry store. Doesn't mean I care enough to pick up the phone and do something about it. And what's the number one thing that CISOs are asking us for right now? Responsiveness and resilience, right? So if humans are the first level of eyes and ears on the ground and they don't care enough to pick up the phone and go, you know, I hate to bother you, but there's something weird going on, right? Now I want them to do but the first thing we need to do is like bat signal, call us. We're gonna help you. If you don't have concordance, they won't call you because they DGAF, you know what I mean? Okay, so those are the kind of things that we then measure if there is an unhealthy culture, because when we get to a healthy digital risk culture, here are the three things I'm looking for. So what we're gonna do over the next few slides is I'm gonna unpack this layer by layer of how you get there from here, wherever here is, and some of the different tools you can start to use in your organization where you can start to say, do we have these things? Because this can start at a conversation level. It doesn't need to be a huge survey. If you'd like a huge survey, call me. I'm here. That's what we do. But it doesn't have to be. It can be literally informal conversations to start about, do you think that's happening here? If so, how much? What should we do about it? So starting here, this is what everyone says they want. This, I believe, is going to start to be the standard of adequate that the Cyber Safety Review Board was looking for. Does that make sense? We're in the home stretch, everybody, because I know this is like, it's like, this is really interesting, but I'm tired. I've been listening all day. Wiggle your toes, it really helps. Bounce around in your seat, clench. Okay, so empowered safety culture, collective risk responsibility. You know, this is sort of like an elevated peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the way that, you know what everyone said was like, cybersecurity is not my job. I'm just a regular employee. I don't need to do anything about cyber, that mentality. This is like that, but fancy, right? Which means everybody at the organization has a responsibility for risk and feels like their decisions matter, okay? And then we want that responsiveness and the resilience, because if you are being attacked or if you are suffering a breach, you want people to be ready, willing, and able to respond, appropriate with their employment status or appropriate with their level at the company, but that's what we want. We want everyone to be like, oh shit, let's go. Okay, something's going on. So these are the three things that I'm aiming for. And we start to break it down. There's a bunch of things that you need. So the first thing that we figured out is, we'll see, unfortunately, in cyber awareness and CornCon, so we can be honest, with a lot of what you see in cybersecurity awareness, what they're calling human risk management now, there's a lot that they say like, you need a good cyber culture. Here are the 10 things you need for a good cyber culture. You don't have a cyber culture. So I find a lot of that to be like marketing talk to make you buy something, because they're like, our phishing simulation helps with your cyber culture. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It's not the same thing. So This is anthropology. It's magic, okay? So what we did is we took organizational anthropology, we took about 4 different models that have been used very successfully over the last 50 years, and we measured the crap out of all of this for a number of years until we figured out the 3 different dimensions that actually matter when it comes to measuring organizational digital risk. If you were measuring something else, you'd probably have more scales, but I only need 3, because what we ended up saying was, how do people like to work digitally? What do they do? How do you do your rules? How do you organize your time? Like, so we put all of that together into these 3 scales. So the first one is structure, which is mostly like, as a business, how are you organized? Are you flat and horizontal and there's decisions everywhere and we're all equal? Or is it more hierarchical and vertical? And then how vertical does it go? Right? So if you're in something like military or defense, where do you think you'd be? Right? You'd be more hierarchical and vertical. If you're in like a loosey-goosey marketing agency, right? Unfortunately, government has a bit of both, because there's like death by meeting and we can't make any decisions unless everyone's in the meeting on one side, and then we have so much bureaucracy going up this way. It's fun. It kind of covers both. It's amazing. But again, these are scales. This is not good or bad. This is just how you work. You need an accurate reflection of how your company actually gets stuff done, because the trail of tears when you try to go against the culture of your company is long. It's like, this is the way we like to do things. I think we should do things another way. That's how I got fired from my first job. Right? Because I was like, oh, I've got better ideas. And the company's like, no, you don't. It's all right. It's all right. It's all good. Made me stronger. So the second is adaptability. And that's really a scale of how well do you respond to change as an organization? Are you change forward? Are you risk averse? Does that make sense? So that's your general, like, can we pivot quickly? Do we have some agility? Do we prefer the slow and steady approach? Do we need to get into analysis paralysis? There's a whole spectrum of different things we can talk there. And then there's interdependence. And I know that's supposed to be a soccer ball, and it looks a little bit like a nuclear facility, but it's team. It's supposed to mean team, okay? And interdependence basically tells you, like, how collectivist or individualistic is your organization. When you think about rewards and punishments, that fits squarely in that category, right? Would people prefer the top sales guy gets the biggest bonus, or would people prefer you get bonused out on the team based on contribution? Not everybody has the same feelings about this. So how, where your company's orientation is fits there. And so once we kind of have these scores, then we could say, okay, now we know how you work. That's great. So now we need to go through 2 levels of enablement. The first is sort of these factors that need to be covered, and then we're going to talk about the behaviors. So none of this should be rocket science. This is all organizational safety culture 501, because we've messed with it a bit, right? But it is built on those foundations, which is, you have to have leadership prioritization and support. So if leadership is not bought into the concept that cyber risk is business risk, or that they have some ownership of that risk, how far are you going to get? With anything, not just even this initiative. Does that make sense? It's like pounding your head on a rock. Okay, then do you have the right training, policies, and resources, group cohesion and belonging? This is the story of a tale of 2 cities, also known as merger and acquisitions. Anyone here work for a company that's grown by acquisition? Ever acquired a company whose culture doesn't quite match your own? That's fun. And they're like, guess what? Now we're one company. And I'm like, oh, we've been together for a month. It's not quite one company yet. So it takes some time to get there, and some companies don't ever get there, right? People holding out on trying to get together. So you can actually measure that distance between groups or tribes or functions. You just got to get in there and do the work. And then, do people have psychological safety empowerment? Because there are toxic work environments where no one will speak up because they're like, I saw what happened to the last guy. I'm not saying anything. Whether I see a password on a monitor or whether I see something actually dangerous in the operational technology environment, not speaking up, there's a lot that you have to have baked into your culture in order to make that information flow even possible, right? And then on the bottom level is, your people actually need to have a commitment to safety and to an individual's self-control. So one of the things we actually measure is inner locus of control. And this is a psychological characteristic, which means that if you have a strong locus of control, it means I am the captain of my own ship, right? I can change my destiny. The things I do matter. It tends to be a very individualistic Western value. The other side is an outer locus of control, which is like, hey, look, the world just moves and I'm just kind of a pawn in it and shit happens and I don't know why and there's not much I can do about it, etc. But we have found that actually that's a key factor in terms of the way that people need to be motivated to take action. It's not that outer locus of control won't take action, they just will do it in a different way. Does that make sense? Okay, so powering through. Okay, so now here are the things that actually need to happen. So if we're thinking about a cyber risk mindset, we want everybody, the whole organization to have, then you have to kind of build this up through the whole organization. Now, these are sort of your cultural circles, but the great thing is all of them can be measured. You can get data on all of this, and then you can measure the change in that data because there are, shockingly, science. There is behavioral science and psychology and stuff behind this that has established practices. So if you make up your own survey questions and you don't do the research, you're not going to get good data. But that's the same thing as your any network or control. Would you walk and be like, well, I think I'm just going to make up my network security as I go along? Those sound like good alerts. Let's just do that. Or you can actually go read a book and get a certification and figure out how this stuff works, right? Human operating system, please treat it with respect. Okay, so these are the different things in terms of enacting behavior. So rewards and punishments. Do they fit your organizational culture? Can you use them for benefit? How well do you do reporting? How well do you do teamwork and collaboration? Because as we look at these factors against each of these circles, a picture emerges of what's happening and what is not happening at your organization. Because these are the horsemen of the digital risk apocalypse. No, I didn't mean it that way. That sounds too dramatic. I'm just trying to keep you guys awake. Okay, but basically this is where we have seen all of these risks before, right? And sometimes we put a name to them, everyone goes, oh yeah, that's totally happening here. But you gotta name it in order to fix it, and you gotta measure it to know that you're fixing it. So for this is like, do we have the right transparency at every level of our business architecture around risk? This one in particular can get really deep and hairy. We've worked with a large organization. Their biggest problem was unclear tolerance because they had never actually gone out from the management level and said, this is what you can and cannot do. This is where we stand. This is how you ask for help. Here's how you need to involve the BISO in cloud-based decisions if you're going to bring in another application. They have manufacturing, they have research, they have sales and marketing, they have patents. Like the IP at this company is insane. And when you measured, do you understand the railroad tracks of risk by which you are allowed as an employee to operate in this organization? Because they were innovation forward, that was their culture, the numbers were all over the map. We were like, oh, whoa, yeah. Like some people are like, lock it down. Other people are like, we don't have any risk tolerance. I don't know what you're talking about. And it was like, oh my God. So what we can do is go in there and start creating well, where are the gaps and where are the risks and how do we need to tackle it? But then you get a game plan because you actually know what the real thing is. The management layer and the executive layer at your organization better be in lockstep on that. Do you know what I mean? So if you're doing a survey and all the employees are a little bit like, I'm not sure, okay, I can handle that. If the executive team has highly variable scores on what the risk tolerance is at the organization, you know someone's going to be playing fast and loose with AI. You know? So these are the kind of things. Who's ever seen fear of bad news? Right? Don't say something, don't speak it up. So I'd be looking at that from the management perspective. Do they think they have the culture? And what does management always say? No, everyone's absolutely able to speak their minds here at the company. And then you go ask all the people actually on the ground, they're like, I wouldn't say anything if you paid me to. So that's how we make that explicit. We take something that is a feeling, people are like, yeah, I guess that's kind of how it works here, and we give it a name, we give it a number, and then we go in and we make it better. So these are the kind of 4 categories that you need to be looking at your organization, because Overconfidence, for instance. We never get that in IT or in IS, do we? Cyber teams are never over, right? So that in itself is a digital risk. Are you challenging each other? Do you have a culture where you're discouraging responding to situations or fostering apathy, right? So all these things can be pulled down and pulled apart and measured and then presented to the board with a plan for remediation, because it's the same steps. You're going to detect, you're going to identify, you're going to name it, you're going to put an improvement plan in place, and then you're going to show how we've mitigated the human risk by patching the human operating system. And we use culture and campaigns, and I use videos with puppets, but that's another story. But we'll use almost any trick in the book to get people on the bus. But you can get people on the bus if you know what bus they want to get on. I personally like the Dr. Teeth, mayhem bus, but other people like nicer, more orderly buses, okay? So this is what your board is looking for. This is what your organization is looking for. They're like, I need a risk strategy. I want to know where you're going with this. Now, I have a feeling, based on the winds of change, that this is going to turn into something that is more of a hardened standard. They're going to get to it last because they always get to people last, but it's coming. I know it's coming, okay? And then the standards of rigor, you have to start thinking around your organization. So this is a top-down approach. We also need to fix the bottom-up approach, but that's probably my talk next year for CornCon, right? Which is why all of your awareness metrics are lying to you. Okay? And then, or we can do that at the bar later, that's good too. Okay? And then we have to talk about incentive design and how do we challenge the actions and preconceptions at all levels of the organization. So really, I know it seems like a big daunting thing to come top down, but what I wanted to talk about and get some thinking on is just that as these big changes happen at the board level, regulatory level, maybe even cyber insurers are going to start asking for some of this information. There is a lot of talk I've been hearing about we'd like to do more than a self-attestation checklist to make sure you're doing the right things. So as that pressure for transparency, visibility, due diligence, due care come in, there's an opportunity to get ahead of it at your organization and even turn this into some informal conversations so that you can start to be the change and get out there a little bit earlier, because these seem hard in the beginning, but this is the long tail of success, right? If you start doing little things on this now, the benefits come in play and they far outweigh any of the risks that will happen. So this is how you get sustainable risk management, and this is how you get everybody on the bus without making people, want to jump off the bus. So that's it. That's my talk. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions? Arguments? Heckling? Go ahead. Thank you for coming in. That's great. Okay, cool. So if anyone wants a copy of my slides, just feel free to hit me up. I'm happy to share this or walk through it a bit more, because I know it was a bit of a lightning round, but there's a lot of method to the madness if anyone wants to geek out on organizational anthropology. Thank you guys, appreciate it.